Andrei Emilia. Nina, a small black drop of something resembling resin, fell on one of the streets of Chumovka, an urban-type settlement located in the Kursk region. According to Grandpa Kostya, a regular at the Drunken Bear bar, this happened in 1981. He swears that it was that year that the area was attacked by chupacabras, and in a neighboring village, the decomposing body of a boy was found hidden in the chimney of an abandoned house. Other old men laugh, saying both happened years earlier, while Ilya Sergeyevich Alfinov is absolutely certain they all happened at different times. However, the stories they tell are so different, as if they were describing entirely different events. This is hardly surprising, given the brain-poisoning cocktail of beer and multiple sclerosis. It's best to hear this story from Ilya Sergeyevich. You won't find a sober narrator from the so-called eyewitnesses in Drunken Bear, anyway. And of those who remain, only Alfinov actually has something to say about those events. Grandpa, tell me about your crazy neighbor. He will lazily turn to you, give you a disgusted look, slap his hand on the next chair, as if to say, sit down, and mutter through his gray teeth, although, to his credit, they are his own teeth. Do you know the rules, kid? Everyone knows these rules of his. As long as Grandpa's mouth opens and wafts the stench of rot, he must drink beer. Ilya Sergeyevich considers telling this story a job for which he should be paid. It's worth noting that he's a mediocre worker. His old man's tongue moves so slowly that during the story you have to buy him 3, sometimes even 4 glasses of beer. Cough. He coughs as usual after the first sip. So that's it. I won't lie, like some of you here would, saying it happened in 1981. That's exactly how it was. Grandpa Kostya will shout from somewhere. I remember. You can't remember, you old fool. And you, as if you can. I can. I lived in the house next to hers, and your sister and I used to check the springs on your beds back then, especially yours. So I remember a lot of things too. What a fool. I never had a sister. Exactly. It was probably your mother. And again, a mistake. I lived alone at the time. So, wait. So that's why my dog wagged his tail when he saw you. They have this dialogue memorized, word for word, even the poses and sighs. But I can definitely say, he continues, taking a sip of beer, that I was already over 30 by then. Katya and I divorced, and she left with Denis for St. Petersburg, which was called Leningrad back then, where a doctor, her boyfriend, was waiting for them. Or rather, he was waiting for her with open arms. My son was most likely a burden to them. Denis wasn't even 2 yet. He probably doesn't even remember me. After all, we haven't seen each other since. Katya left no address, no one to call. You could say that Viper stole my son, my money, and 8 of the best years of my life. Yeah, kid, for 8 years I shared a bed with that succubus hiding behind a sweet face. Her looks were certainly oh so pretty, but her soul was some kind of haven for hellish creatures. I toiled away my days on a stinking pig farm in Lesnoye, so I could pamper her with gifts from my second shift and save up for a vacation. What's with all those eyes wide open? Lesnoye is a dying village now, but back then it was bustling with life until the collective farm was shut down. Okay, that's another story. Where was I? That he worked on a pig farm in 2 shifts. No, really. I worked 1 shift there and then toiled at the brick factory to bring home a few extra kopecks for the succubus. Meanwhile, she was bringing men into the house. Every time I talk about it, I start to wonder if Dennis really was my son. Grandpa Kostya is silent at this point, but his face is twisted by the sly grin of a cat who has pooped in his owner's slipper and is watching his foot about to step into the still warm surprise. No one knows for sure, but it's possible he did test the aforementioned springs with Alfanov's wife once or twice. Listen, but keep an eye on my glass so that I don't get distracted and don't remind you of it. Yes, Grandpa, of course. Here you have to come to terms with the fact that he deliberately talked about his wife just to get an extra drink. Sure, sometimes you want to give him a good kick in the liver, but then you realize it's better to have a beer. It'll make him suffer longer. I think the first one was tastier. Oh well. Actually, this whole story with Nina began in early spring, when she climbed onto the roof after a kitten. Mursik was screaming so loudly for his owner to help that she, in her haste, didn't set up the ladder properly. Nina already had 1 foot on the slippery roof when the ladder played a cruel joke on her. It slipped on the mud and she fell. I went out onto the porch to have a smoke when I heard screams. "Help! Help! I'm falling, people!" I had to jump over the fence, which, by the way, was probably 2 meters high, if not 3. But then my legs were like a stallion's. And not just my legs. A face and a laugh like the neighing of an old nag. Grandfather Kostya interjects, but Ilya Sergeyevich pretends not to hear. I didn't immediately understand where she was screaming from, and when I did, it was too late. Thud. A dull thud, like a bag of cement falling. Nina was lying on her back and didn't move. I rushed to her. She regained consciousness and, upon seeing me, asked with such surprise that I'll always remember her intonation. "Ilyusha, why can't I feel my legs? Poor thing." She was in such shock that she couldn't understand that her legs were just part of what she would never feel again. That's what the doctor said. And that's exactly how it was supposed to be. But unfortunately, things turned out quite differently. She broke and crushed several vertebrae. There was something else, but I can't remember what. Anyway, a paralyzed woman began living in house number 48 on Pervomaiskaya Street. I saw Nina in the middle of summer. A Volga pulled up to her house, although I could be mistaken. Her son Petka was driving, and she was in the passenger seat. There was no life in her glassy eyes. Her once enchanting jet black hair was now streaked with gray. Her pale skin suggested that not a single ray of light from that distant star called the sun had ever penetrated the hospital room. He started talking like a writer, loves Grandpa Kostya. Nina had undergone dozens of operations, but everything below her neck ceased to belong to her, became someone else's. And she herself, and I learned this from her later, had become a burden to everyone. Petka, with some effort, transferred her to a wheelchair. He was angry, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. I watched them through the summer kitchen window. But I didn't have the courage to go out and help, or even just say hello. Ilya Sergeyevich smiles as they pour him a third glass. You start to wonder if at this rate he'll drink 5 before he's even halfway through his story. And beer isn't exactly good for his memory. A week later, I was returning home when I saw Nina through the open gate. She was sitting on the porch in a rocking chair. To keep the poor thing from falling, the nurse was tying her with 2 ropes that crossed over her still wonderful chest. They were so taut, they were digging into that beauty. I walked up to her and said, "Hi, neighbor." Then I kissed her on the cheek. Nina smiled, touched by this gesture. I squatted down and placed my hand on her knee, thereby wiping the smile from her face. "Idiot. I can't feel it," she complained. "I want to feel it, but I can't. Like, these aren't my legs. It's like I'm trapped in someone else's body, leaving me only the ability to look, listen, and talk." We spent about an hour gossiping. Nina was complaining about her son. Although Petka had arranged for the surgeries, he himself had only visited her twice, before the first operation and when he picked her up. Even after bringing his mother back to his own little nest, Petka hired a nurse the next day and disappeared back to Moscow, citing important official business. The nurse turned out to be a young woman named Sofia, with a Jewish surname, not a local. Petka had brought her from Kursk. The girl cooked, did the laundry, washed Nina, and, when needed, put the potty under her feet. In theory, she did all her work, if you consider it simply the clauses of a hastily drafted contract. In reality, things were different. Sofia's cooking was inedible. Sometimes it was tasteless, sometimes too salty, sometimes your mouth almost smoked from the pepper. The bitter taste of burnt food was the worst nightmare, and almost everything burned. Laundry meant dousing things with water and then hanging them out in the yard. She washed Nina only once during the first week. She placed her in a bathtub that was a third full and left for half an hour. And before pulling her out, she poured a couple of ladles of cold water over the helpless woman's head. You know what happened with the potty. Listening, I got the impression that Petka himself had ordered this treatment of my mother to send her to the grave as quickly as possible, to end her suffering and patch up the hole in my wallet called paralyzed mom. Nina also complained about the doctors who had blunted more than one scalpel on her and hadn't done anything useful. Then, out of the blue, she started thanking me for feeding music all this time, and I hadn't given that flea-ridden bastard a crumb. I didn't like him. He had a sly face. Those kind of people steal meat from the table the moment your back is turned, or they crap under the bed. This one went even further and ruined his owner's life, turning her into an invalid. I didn't mention that it wasn't me who was responsible for Murzik not starving to death. Although, if the cat had died, who knows how this story would have played out now, or even if it had. Perhaps everything would have worked out, or perhaps it would have gotten worse. What's with the beer? Are you choking on it? Don't worry, this story only has a long introduction, and it'll move along more quickly from there. I started visiting Nina almost every day. I brought her cakes and pastries and made her tea. Oh, how the Jewess got mad, but she was so happy when I took Nina for a walk. A couple of times we even went to the forest and the river. And now, maybe you should order me another beer right away so you don't have to interrupt later. You have to do as the old drunkard says, or the old fart. Anyone who's ever visited his house will understand. After Katya left me, I started working exclusively at the pig farm. Do you know that I was once known as a renowned artist here? People dreamed of hanging my paintings in their homes, and they paid me quite a lot of money for it, by those standards. I gave up my job at the brick factory, which turned out to be quite convenient. It burned down a month later, and if I had stayed there, the fire would have fallen on my shift. I did the math. Then the local newspaper would have written about 7 dead, not 6. But that's not what I'm talking about. After leaving the brick factory, I took up painting again. An artist, Grandfather Kostya, adds mockingly, but again remains unheard. At the beginning of August, I finished my best work. He doesn't say what it was called or what it depicted, but all the Chumovites know that he painted Nina's portrait, just as they know that he saved his creation from the fire and now hides it in the attic. It was my gift for Nina. I finished writing it this morning, and at about 5 o'clock, grabbing the painting and some cakes, I went to see her. It was the eve of her birthday. But I didn't have the patience. I wanted to make her happy. I wrapped the gift in paper, tied it with a colorful ribbon, and didn't forget to tie it in a bow. The clear sky wasn't marred by even the most innocent, translucent cloud. Do you hear? The writer spoke through his lips again. Cough. I lit a cigarette and went outside. Merzik was lying in the dust by the road. He was basking, cuddling, purring, farting, licking himself, scratching himself, basking in the mundane duties of a cat. Looking at him, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time, this creature struck me as cute. Or rather, for the first and last time. Believe it or not, I saw a black drop fall on his face, just like bird poop, only black as tar. Murzik squealed as if an invisible car had run over his tail. The next second, he started slapping himself in the face. He must have been trying to wipe away the drop. Dogs started barking in the neighboring yards. I wanted to go over and help him, but he jumped up and ran home. Nina said Murzik had hidden under the bed, and that trying to get him out now would be a disaster. He'd scratch and bite. I told her what I'd seen. True, there was no talk of a black drop back then. The sparrow had simply dropped a bomb on the would-be killer. I handed her the painting, after which we sat down to have tea, ignoring the hissing sound coming from under the bed. So, we've come to the sad events of that time. He downs the rest of his beer in one gulp and immediately reaches for another glass. You know why I'll never agree with that idiot and his 81. It's simple. It may have started in 81, but it ended in the spring of the following year. Nina invited me to her birthday party, but I couldn't come. Monday is a hard day. I remember it as if it were yesterday, and we were already working late into the night. We had to help vaccinate all the piglets against some kind of disease. But in return, I got the next day off. I admit that even then I felt attracted to Nina. We were sitting in the kitchen, talking, while Sophie washed the floor. Nina said she only worked when guests came to the house, meaning only when I was there. Then she asked if she could take her for a short walk. "The stroller is in the room, please roll it in." I left the kitchen and slipped into the bedroom after Sophia. The wheelchair was parked by the closet. She snorted disapprovingly, saying she just washed the floor there, then threw a rag over the mop and started cleaning under the bed. I wanted to say something to her, but I didn't have time. Murzik, dead and frozen, landed on my feet, having accidentally knocked him out from under the bed. I'd never held him before, but I can confidently say he weighed far less than he should have. I don't know if cat's hair turns gray normally, but Murzik had developed clumps of gray hair, and his eyes were cloudy. In my arms was not a 9-month-old kitten, but a 20-year-old tomcat, on whom death had finally decided to take pity. Oh, how hysterical Nina was. She mourned him for a week. Not everyone's death can evoke as many tears as Murzik's. Nina's cheeks were probably wet even when she slept. Several times I took her out for an evening walk, where she constantly said that it was Sophia who killed the poor kitty, poisoned him, hit him with a mop. I was inclined to think Murzik had contracted some kind of disease. It never occurred to me then that the cat had been infected right before my eyes. But you can't really call it a disease. He falls silent. Apparently, the beer had sent its intoxicating tentacles into his senile brain and was starting to muddle his thoughts. "Oh, kid, you'll have to wait a little. My bladder's about to leak." With these words, he jumps up and runs out of the bar. "Congratulations," Mikhail Andreevich smiled. He usually runs after every glass, but he's put up with so much. Very well. The next glass is on the house. Ilya Sergeyevich plops down in his seat, and the first thing he does is reach for his unfinished beer. Wow, it's like a fire hose, I swear. You should have seen it, kid. Everyone starts laughing. It's just not clear what exactly is making them laugh so much. After all, things are pretty grim for Grandpa. A stray mongrel turned him into a eunuch in the late 1990s. Actually, nothing else interesting happened until the end of August. It was already late summer and perhaps early fall that Nina and I were sitting in my gazebo. Clusters of sour grapes hung above us, the memory of which makes my teeth ache. There was no romance at all. What romance could there be in feeding okroshka to a paralyzed woman? What can I say? The night after that okroshka, I was pretty damned relieved. Just like Nina, actually. Yes, Sophia was messing around with the body that night. But, one way or another, it was there in the gazebo that a spark flew between us, then another, and then it sparked and struck. I was completely lost in her brown eyes, the scent of her skin. What's more, the smell of okroshka from her mouth excited me. Our lips stuck together in a wet kiss. The spoon fell under the table. Her teeth clicked painfully together. I pulled her close with one hand and with the other slid down, starting from her neck. The next second, Nina's lips began to tremble, leaving me in dismay. "You idiot! What have you done?" I thought, terrified that I'd ruined our friendship. I feel," she whispered through the tears that were rolling down her face. "I feel your hands. Hold me tighter, please." And I hugged her as tight as I could. Damn, how her heart was pounding. It was a miracle. Petka arrived a week later, and Nina set out again on a tour of doctors and hospitals. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. Each new X-ray showed how her vertebrae were healing. They offered her several surgeries that could have restored her to health, but she refused. Even then, Nina knew it would happen anyway. In mid-September, she returned home. Still confined to a wheelchair, Nina could now move independently. The paralysis had begun to lose control over the usurped areas of her body. Her arms were freed from its grip. She could feel them. She could move them as before. She could feel touches on her chest and stomach. Only her legs remained paralyzed by the disease. Nina herself blossomed like a spring flower with each passing day. Her skin acquired a healthy hue. Her gray hair was either falling out or perhaps refilling with pigment and turning black. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes, I can't say exactly what metamorphosis they were undergoing. He smiles, glad he was able to get the word in. He actually likes the word and uses it at least 5 times a day, on and off topic. But their beauty captivated me more and more each time I looked into them. Even the wrinkles smoothed out. Petka left at the end of September, taking Sofia with him. The need for a nurse finally died down when Nina began going to the bathroom on her own. In October, Nina stood up from her wheelchair for the first time and took a hesitant step. And in November, I carried the wheelchair up to the attic. Nina was completely healed. Moreover, she had changed. She looked 10 or 15 years younger. All of Chumovka was convinced of the miracle of what had happened. Some even spoke of divine intervention. Now I understand that these were the seeds of evil sprouting, a drop of which fell on Murzik. We made love every day, and on weekends we barely got out of bed. I loved that woman, the part of Nina that was still her, and had no idea she was sharing her body with anything else. Kid, have you ever loved anyone? Why are you blushing? Ah, youth. All you think about is getting a member of the fair sex drunk and then bending her over in the bushes. Romance is dead. Love is dead. And soon we will die too, leaving the world to your mercy. Love isn't when she fulfills all your unhealthy fantasies and pretends to enjoy it. No, kid. Love is when you do everything she tells you to do. Grandpa Kostya interjects. I remember I loved this old woman who made me fight. Shut up, you idiot. This is not love. And, in my opinion, this is true love. So marry that board you always shit on. Okay, kid, let's get back to the story. In the winter, Nina started to change. She was becoming a stranger to me. In January, we had our first argument. I brought home a couple of kilos of pork. Just a couple of hours ago, the little pig was running around with his brothers, and now his meat is already sizzling in the frying pan. Nina fried half of what I brought for dinner, so we sat down at the table. She put boiled potatoes, sauerkraut, and a couple of pieces of meat on my plate. You can't imagine how surprised I was when I bit into a piece and blood started pouring out. On the outside, the meat looked cooked, fried until crisp, but on the inside, it was raw as could be. My jaw dropped so much, it almost fell to my knees, and pig's blood started running down my chin. I miraculously didn't throw up, and Nina looked at me and chewed the same raw piece, but with pleasure. Of course, I threw a fit. What? You think it's a trifle? Well, maybe for you, the lovers of those train station chibureki, it is. But the pig farm workers know about the massive worms. And what do you think she told me? I thought you'd like it. Yeah, of course. After my late grandfather, Hariton, died, 3 of those came out of his ass, each one nearly 3 meters tall. So, guess what he died of? Maybe his wife didn't cook his meat well either. In a couple of minutes, the scandal gained momentum, and a plate with this raw meat and a lot of other things was thrown at me. From that evening onwards, I started spending the night at home, and I didn't speak to Nina until the end of January. And by the way, it was in the first month of the new year that the first child went missing. I don't remember the name, but it was the Ilyinich boy. Their only son took some pies to his grandmother that evening and never returned. The pies did reach their intended recipient. Little Red Riding Hood met the wolf on her way back. That night, we searched for him throughout almost all of Chumovka. The frost grew stronger, and with it, hope faded. By morning, someone found the boy's jacket. He takes a sip and forces the beer down his throat. Something like that, kid. Something like that. But the monster lived in the house next door. Nina went with us on the search when the boy's body was hidden in her cellar. Bitch. Love blinds, but then everyone was blind. No one could have thought of the woman God gave a second chance. In early February, Lyubochka Arkhipova disappeared, a 5-year-old girl. Everyone called her Vesnushka, a redhead, just like her mother. He smiles, his eyes welling with emotion at the memory. Igor and Masha left her alone at home, and when they returned from the party, she was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, except for a broken cup. Once again we searched for the child throughout Chumovka. That night, Nina and I made peace. By morning, there wasn't a spot on my back that her nails hadn't torn away. We weren't making love then. No, we were fucking. We were screwing like animals, like snakes tangled in a ball, like wolves biting each other and screaming like monkeys. At that moment, I was too stupid to understand that our love was dead. Sometimes I looked at the painting I gave her. I remembered Nina when she was paralyzed, and deep down I missed that time. She cooked separately for us. My meat was fried to a crisp, while hers landed on the plate, barely touching the pan. I felt uneasy when, after eating, Nina's lips would reach for mine. It was disgusting. I could smell the raw meat stink on her breath. But at first, I didn't have the courage to tell her about it. I was afraid to ruin everything. In the second half of February, Artem Maximov's daughter disappeared. His wife died in childbirth, so Toma, yes, her name was Toma, was all he had left. When she didn't return from school until dark, Artem realized she had vanished like his previous children. He grabbed a shotgun and went door to door. He kicked down doors, pointed the gun at the owners, and then turned everything upside down in the hopes of finding her. But he didn't find her. That night, he went mad. Perhaps it happened the very second he realized he'd lost his daughter. He was sent to some mental hospital, not Kareshkaya, some other one. March has arrived. I adopted 4 piglets from a farm. Nina and I lived together, but also separately. So one piglet found a home in my barn and 3 in hers. But the 3 died a couple of days later. I found them in the morning. 3 corpses, each the size of a cat, lying next to each other. And when I came home to Nina that evening, I saw 2 of them on the table. The one intended for me was baked to a crisp, and hers, a nearly raw piece of meat, reeked of a pigsty. I didn't ask where the 3rd piglet had gone. I certainly didn't want to know the answer to that question. The only thing that united us at that moment was the dining table and the bed. The phantom of love continued to dissolve. Petty quarrels began, which, like a ball of snow rolling down a hill, turned into something frightening, dangerous. "Your dog is growling at me," she snapped as soon as I entered the house. Indeed, Buddy was barking at her as if she were a fox circling the chicken coop. The dog saw the essence hidden beneath her soft skin. Yes, but he's chained up in my yard, in your yard, and I thought it was ours. No, that's my house, my yard, and here is your house and yard. We argued for about half an hour until she somehow got me into bed and convinced me that there was no longer hers or mine. Now there was only ours. And the next evening, when I came home from work, I found out that she had gone into my yard and stabbed Druzhok to death with a pitchfork, the bitch. And I loved that dog so much. The mongrel with the mismatched eyes. That was the final point in the story of my relationship with Nina. I hated her. When 3 more children went missing, I didn't go looking for them, so as not to cross paths with her again. She, after all, took part in the search for each of them. You know, kid, there's probably a succubus living inside every woman on this earth. By mid-March, grief for the children had taken hold in 6 homes, now 5. The Maximov house was completely empty. The last missing person at that time was the Matyukhin's son. It would have been better for his parents to bury him in their thoughts than to see him again. Ilya Sergeyevich swallows his beer with difficulty. It's better not to have a child than to nurse a living corpse. 2 days after the abduction, someone saw him walking down the street. He was about 8 years old, but eyewitnesses said he looked like an old man, a freak from a traveling circus. His bare feet trudged through the snow. The wind beat his naked body with its small, icy teeth. His head was completely hairless. His eye sockets appeared empty at first glance, but only upon closer inspection did it become clear that this was not the case. His eyes had shriveled like grapes in the cold and sunken. 2 fingers were missing from his left hand. His tongue had been torn out, castrated. The boy walked along the road, not knowing where he was going and not knowing where he was coming from. He had turned into a vegetable, a living corpse. Lenka sat next to him day and night. She, it was said, never left the room while he was there. And when the boy died a few days later, Lenka's nervous system malfunctioned. Something with her digestive tract or something. Basically, everything went wrong, and she started spitting shit out of her mouth. Vanka completely drank himself to death from it all. The bottle killed him in just 6 months. And a month later, Lenka hanged herself. We all felt uneasy at the thought that the monster who had done this to our child was still here with us, that he was visiting us or inviting us over, that he was living right next door. In April, snow lay on the streets until mid-month. Meanwhile, a virtual state of emergency was declared in the village itself. Parents personally took their children to school and then picked them up. Some took their children to work instead. No one could guarantee that the kidnapper wasn't their child's homeroom teacher. At school, concerned teachers escorted the children to the restroom. As dusk fell, people locked themselves in their houses and waited for dawn. 3 weeks had passed since the Matyuhin's boy returned, and then another child disappeared, a baby snatched from its crib by an evil monster. He gulps his beer and winces. The young parents woke up, and he was gone. The door was locked from the inside, no sign of forced entry. It was as if the baby had just vanished. It then became clear that there was no salvation anywhere. This continued until the end of May. Me and some of my friends had a good drinking party at my place that day. We drank moonshine, argued, and discussed women. And then I realized that the only thing missing from the table for complete happiness was sauerkraut, and Nina had plenty of it in her cellar. I don't know how it happened, but the next minute, Grishka and I were walking through her yard. Moonshine is Satan's invention. It dulls fear and awakens the hero who is hidden deep within for a reason. I opened the cellar door like I owned the place, and Grishka and I began to descend. He led the way. I followed. The sharp cold dulled the effects of the alcohol, but not enough to make us back down. "Mommy!" The 30-year-old man whispered in fear and stopped. I crashed into him. "Why are you standing there?" He didn't answer. I slapped the light switch. Yeah, Nina's stupid ex-husband had stuck it downstairs, not like normal people. The light came on in the cellar. Just one bulb, but it was enough to make Grishka sick. And he pauses, a tear rolling down his cheek. And I ran away like a coward. Ilya Sergeyevich turns away and starts crying. He never tells what happened next, but he doesn't need to. Everyone already knows. Grigory Alexandrovich met his death in the cellar among the remains of children. Ilya Sergeyevich told his drinking buddies what he had seen, and soon a crowd gathered outside Nina's house. They say Alfinov broke into the burning house and carried away her portrait, the very one he had painted for her birthday. Speculation began to circulate that she had fallen from the roof, hit her head, and eventually gone crazy because of it. A crazy woman who stole children to eat them. But her mental disorder doesn't fit with what Ilya Sergeyevich said about what he saw in the cellar. The gnawed corpses of children lay piled on the ground. The faces of several were intact, allowing for identification. The bodies were disemboweled, and black slime literally crawled over them. It crept into the gnawed holes, crawled out through the mouths, and flowed down to the ripped open stomachs. But that wasn't why he ran away. The creature frightened him. A black, gelatinous monster in Nina's belongings. A monster that grew from a single drop, a substance whose origins are unknown. The bogeyman who was burned, along with evidence of his existence, since after the fire, only the charred bodies of the children and Grigory Alexandrovich were found in the cellar, and no hint of the black, gelatinous monster.